turn my mic on. I just have to be so careful because you guys don't need to hear me sing. So I try to keep that thing off as much as possible. I want you to come back. So I am very thankful for everyone being here today. I really do hope you have a great Thanksgiving. We're going to continue our study in Acts, and so we're in chapter 3. So last week we opened up and talked about the miracle that took place where Peter and John have their famous phrase of we don't have any silver or gold, but what we do have we give to you. And he reached out his hand and helped the crippled man to stand up, and he's walking and leaping and praising God, and we talked about that. So then after this sets everything up. The reason why this happened, we talked about this last week. The whole reason why this is here is so that Peter would have this opportunity to preach this sermon. And so there's a man who was crippled and waiting there just because God was going to use this exact situation to set this up for him to have this amazing opportunity to preach. So this is Peter's second sermon. It is going to be another two-parter. I thought that I would get through all of it in one, and I will not. Again, in study, I thought I was going to be able to get through all of chapter 3 in one sermon, and that was never going to happen. Then as I was studying through this one, I need to break it up into two as well because there's two big segments here. So we're going to be doing verses 11 through 16 today. So Acts chapter 3, 11 through 16 will be our text. To start it off, so what this is all about perspective. So Peter kind of begins his sermon by talking about perspective. And it reminded me of a story. My mom's here, she can attest to this. This one's a fun one. I was little. I don't know how young. Probably 5 or 6. And I was singing in our children's choir. Okay? And singing in the children's choir up on the stage, somehow I discovered that if I stuck my middle finger straight up and held it high, people laughed. Okay? So the kids all around me were laughing, and I thought I was the funniest person on earth. Because they were laughing so hard, and I'm sitting here, if anybody's seen Mr. Bean, it was like that. And I'm just like, in church, on stage, here, and then, and long story short, I wasn't funny. My parents didn't think I was funny. Other adults did not think I was funny. The choir director didn't think I was funny. I thought I was really funny, but I was not. It was a wrong perspective. I thought it was just that they were laughing at my silly faces and me being silly. They weren't. They were laughing because I was doing something terribly wrong and very inappropriate. And this is kind of the story of my life. I think I'm pretty funny. I laugh at myself all the time. And Michael, my friend, tells me all the time that I'm definitely not funny. So that's okay. I can laugh at my jokes anyways. But here's the problem here. I had a wrong perspective in that story, right? I had the perspective that I'm just being silly and I'm really funny. Everybody else had the perspective of, oh my goodness, this 6-year-old's flipping everybody off in church. That was a wrong perspective, and it changes everything to have the right perspective. In this passage, we're going to be looking at a perspective change, and Peter calling for a change in perspective for what God was doing. So we're going to open up with verses 11 and 12. It says, while he clung to Peter and John and all the people, utterly astounded, ran together to them into the portico called Solomon's. And when Peter saw it, he addressed the people, men of Israel, why do you wonder at this, or why do you stare at us as though by our own power or piety we have made him walk? So first of all, we're going to break this down a little bit. So for this man who was just healed, he's clinging to Peter and John, right? That's a word that means holding tightly to something and not letting go. So he's holding on to these two men. Now, what I think here that we can see is that this is not this man worshiping Peter and John, because who does he praise first and foremost as soon as he's healed? God. He is dancing and jumping and praising God. But the thing is that this man is going to tell this story for the rest of his life, isn't he? Everybody he meets, he's going to be saying, no, you see this now? I wasn't always like this. I was crippled from birth to adulthood and had to beg at a temple gate. I can walk now. He's going to tell this story over and over and over to anyone who will listen. I'm sure he'll tell a lot of people multiple times, right? He'll be going up to them and saying, hey, did you hear about what happened to me? Yes, you told us like 6 times yesterday. He's going to be telling this story all the time because this changed everything for him, right? In his story, Peter and John are going to be heroes, aren't they? They're going to be, man, these guys, they shared the truth with me. They talked to me. They let me tell you what they said. But they're not going to be the heroes of the story, are they? In this story, he's going to say God used those men, God worked with them, and God healed me. Jesus healed me. And that's the thing, that's the proper perspective. There are people that we can appreciate along the way and be thankful for their obedience. But in the end, are people the ones who do anything great in our lives? No. It is God. So we see this here. He's clinging on to them. He's holding on to them, saying, oh my goodness, I love them. They shared the truth with me. They talked to me. They were obedient to God, and God did something amazing in my life. But we have to guard against the pedestal problem, don't we? Because in the end, a lot of times it's easy to put people in a place where only God belongs, isn't it? Or when people do something really, when we see people very obedient to God, and God using people in strong ways, it's easy to place them up in a higher place and start praising the person instead of praising God. There are many people in my life that I am extremely thankful for their obedience, because their obedience to God helped God do amazing things in my life. But those people are not the ones who made me into, or helped me become a stronger Christian, are they? The people didn't do it. They were obedient to God, and they were used by God to do great things inside of my life, but it was still always God who was doing the growing and the changing and the forming, wasn't it? And so we can be thankful for people. There could be people that we constantly look to and think about as far as, man, that person really helped me in their obedience to God, changed things for me and helped me see things in a different way. But we have to always remember that glory belongs to God alone. These people, so this man's clinging to Peter and John, and all of a sudden these people are looking, and it says they are utterly astounded. This is a word that means it's being astonished or alarmed at something. They are beholding a miracle and wondering how men had wrought it. I want us to understand this. These people were just staring, astounded at Peter and John, saying, how in the world did these two rednecks from Galilee make a crippled man walk? They're astounded because they don't see how a normal human being could have done something so miraculous. But like we saw last week, worship and miracles are symptoms of beholding God. You see, these people were astonished at Peter and John because they didn't see God for who He is. Therefore, they didn't expect Him to do what He does. Does that make sense? If you don't see God for who He is, then it is very easy to think He doesn't do miracles. It's very easy to miss God's activity in the world when you don't have a good view of God Himself. If you're not beholding God, if you're not looking at Him as the great and awesome creator of the universe, the one who sent His Son to die, the one who saved us from our sins, if we don't have a proper view of Him, then we will not recognize His activity in the world just like these people did. They see a man that was born crippled, get up and walk and dance and jump, and they thought, what kind of trick is this? They immediately went to the natural because they didn't have a good view of God. So they ran, this group of people ran to go and check Peter and John out. They go to the Solomon's Portico. This is the regular meeting place for the Christians where these thousands met together to talk about Jesus and what He was doing. They needed explanations, right? They had seen this man day after day, week after week, sitting here at the beautiful gate asking for money. And all of a sudden, the same man, they knew him. They had seen him all the time. He's running and jumping and dancing and praising God and hugging John and Peter. And they're saying, we need answers. We're astonished by this. We don't get it. How did these two guys do this? Peter looks over and he sees it. He sees this group of these aren't Christian people. There's just a whole bunch of people having been meeting with them. And he sees them running to try to catch up and just staring at Peter. And it says he addressed the people. I want you guys to understand something. This makes me respect Peter so much. Now, does Peter have mistakes in his life? Yes, they're included in Scripture, right? He denies Christ. He cuts somebody's ear off. He tells Jesus not to die. He tells Jesus not to wash his feet. I mean, he has a good record of lots of bad choices and mistakes. But this is one that's amazing to me. What he did, he turned around and saw what we see is probably thousands of people that were amazed at his great deeds, right? These people were amazed that Peter was so great and so awesome that he could heal somebody who was born crippled. These people were marveling at Peter. I'm sure that they were praising his name to each other. I'm sure that he could hear the talk of, did you see what that guy Peter did? Did you see? He healed this guy. This is amazing. I don't know how this guy did it, but he's awesome. So many people fail in this area, don't they? So many people in ministry fail right here because it feels good to be admired and appreciated. It's easy to let that go to your head. It's easy to desire the praise of people so much that when God is doing something, you let them give you credit for it. It's easy to willingly allow others to praise you for God's work. But that's sin. It's sin because none of us deserve God's glory. Now, I'm going to confess a little bit here. It's difficult sometimes to know how to handle that, isn't it? Because sometimes, people come up, and I'm sure, especially if you're as talented as some of our musicians are, if you're talented as Anita is, and somebody comes up and says, man, you did such a great job. It can be awkward to know what to say, right? Because did you put effort into this? Sometimes, I think maybe once I've had somebody come and tell me that I did an okay sermon. And so if that happens, right, then, did I put work into preparing me? Sure, that takes a lot of work because I'm not very smart. So I have to spend a lot of time working on these. But in the end, if God did something in your life, is that because of my study efforts? Nope. Has nothing to do with me. Now, I had a role in being obedient, but it is God who deserves praise for the work of His Word in your life. Does that make sense? So my job, and I'm still figuring out how exactly to do this. Sometimes I'll try to say praise God, or I'll try to say things like that. But the goal is that we constantly look to God and say, man, His Word is awesome. I'm doing nothing. I'm not inventing anything new here. I'm teaching something that has been around for 2,000 years. We're just looking at the Word together, and His Word is powerful and mighty, and it does great things. You see, that's the thing, is that we're called, as Peter does right here, not to take credit for what God does. Because Peter didn't heal a man that was born crippled, did he? God did. So he turns and he chooses to address the crowd. He doesn't just let it go. And we're responsible to constantly point people's praise to God and away from men. If you're anything like me, it's easy to praise man, isn't it? It's easy to look at the great things that people can do, or have some of my favorite speakers, some of my favorite pastors, some of my favorite stuff, think, man, they're the best. And in the end, my praise is not where it should be if I'm praising any person. We should be praising God for His use of others. We should be praising God, and we can be certainly thankful for the obedience of others. I can be so thankful that somebody was obedient and diligent in their study, and diligent in their practice of their gifts, diligent in their use of it. And I can be so thankful for their obedience, but I cannot praise a person for what God does in my life through their obedience, because they don't deserve it. We're never going to let anyone believe that men can will the miraculous into existence. Man can be obedient. God does the impossible. Right? Mankind is obedient. God does the impossible through the obedience of others. And he looks at these guys as he's addressing them, Peter does, and he says, men of Israel, why do you wonder at this? So these men of Israel, these are temple-going religious people. And yet they had a tragically low view of God. Does that sound familiar? It does to me. I feel like that's the story of the church today, isn't it? Lots of people that attend church on a weekly or close to weekly basis. They show up, they do Sunday school, they give some money, they listen to a sermon, they sing some songs, and they leave God inside the church when they walk out. They don't see God as God of everything, and that He's everywhere and in charge of all things. I struggle here. I many times have a tragically low view of God, where I'm slow to see His activity in the world because I'm looking at people and thinking, well, how do those people do this? Or thank God for this, or thank God for, I'll thank God for the man and the medicine and the stuff and the things, and not be looking and saying, no, this is God doing these things. He is the healer. He is the one who is working in all of the activities I see around me, and I don't have a big enough view of Him. So these people were wondering, and this is a word that means to marvel at an event or an object. And I think what Peter is saying here is, have you not studied the Scriptures? We serve an awesome God. Have you not read all the things that God has done inside of our history? God has split the Red Sea, who has saved Isaac's life when Abraham was obedient. God who has chariots of fire, who has armies all around his people. God who has felled Jericho with the singing of voices. Our God is great. And yet you see a miracle and think, how did man do it? So why did these God-fearing men marvel at a miracle? Because God had become so small that they expected very little out of it. They saw a miracle and couldn't attribute it to God because their view of God had become so little that he couldn't perform miracles anymore. I wonder how many Christians live in that world today, where God is so small that we see miracles all around us and we have to attribute it to something man does because God's not big enough to do miracles anymore. He says, or why do you stare at us as though by our own power or piety we have made him walk? So this staring, this word here is a Greek word that we get our word attention from. They devoted their entire attentions just staring, open-mouthed, gawking at Peter and John. And Peter tells them, you're looking in the wrong direction if you're looking for who caused this miracle. If you're staring at me wondering how I healed a man who was born crippled, I have no answers for you. What power or piety did Peter and John have? None. These were uneducated, working-class men from the poor section of town. If you guys remember, we talked about Galilee already. This is where it was mainly a bunch of immigrants that were pushed into one section of the country of Israel, and they were all kind of put there because they were the undesirables of the area. And so they mostly were working-class people. They were fishermen. They would work a couple of farms, stuff like that. These were the peasants, right? Galileans were not the renowned people. These were uneducated men, and they're saying, and Peter and John saying, so you're saying me, a simple man from Galilee, suddenly touched this guy, and I gave him the ability to walk again? That's crazy. They couldn't have made a crippled man well any more than I could have helped Tennessee win yesterday. Sorry, I had to throw one in there. Yes, I'm not a huge football fan, but yesterday was a fun day. That was wild. Alabama lost, and then Tennessee, that was terrible, but it is what it is. Sorry for that. Georgia won, if it makes anybody else feel better. Peter's lightly rebuking these people. He's telling them that they are making far too much of men and far too little of God. He's saying, look, you are making much out of two simple guys that can do nothing more than you can. And you are making very little of a God you say you believe in. How many times do we witness the miraculous, witness the awesome, witness the workings of God and say, man, that guy's great. Man, that doctor's the best. Man, this person over here, they can really do this really well. And we don't see God's working through all things because we have such a tragically small view of Him. It says then in verses 13 through 15, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of our fathers, glorified His servant Jesus, whom He delivered over and denied in the presence of Pilate when He had decided to release Him. But you denied the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you, and you killed the author of life, whom God raised from the dead. To this we are witnesses. This first part is saying, this is your God. You people of Israel that have been attending the temple, have been coming to prayer time, doing this stuff for so long, for all of your lives. You've read about what He has done and what He can do. You've read the prophecies of the Messiah. He has been pointing you to this Jesus from the beginning of the story. If you want to, I'm not going to read it today just to save you a little bit of time, but Isaiah chapter 52, starting in verse 13 and then through the rest of chapter 53, talks about the suffering servant. Right? This is when Jesus is prophesied to be coming, and He's going to be the suffering servant. He's going to be rejected by men, even though He's going to bear the sins of all. The Messiah that came, though, was not the one that they desired. Here's the problem that happened with these people and why these people were able to see the life of Jesus, the death of Jesus, and still reject Him. He wasn't the Messiah they wanted. They studied the prophecies about the kingdom being set up, and they were expecting an earthly kingdom with an earthly king. They wanted a Jewish person sitting on a throne as the king of all the nations, and that they would be in places of power. Jesus did come and set up a kingdom, but it was a spiritual kingdom. And it wasn't one that put others under his subjection. It was one that was inviting to all. He said all can be citizens of this kingdom, and they did not like that. You see, this wasn't the Messiah they desired, so they rejected him. It reminds me a lot of our own designer gods in the church world today, right? You'll hear people say things like, oh, no, my God wouldn't do that. My God loves everybody. My God doesn't think that's a sin. I don't believe that anymore. And so we create our own version of who God is to suit our desires, instead of saying whatever God says about himself is who God is. And things that God says are sin are sin. And even if culture changes, that does not. Things that God says are right to do are right to do, even if culture changes and says it's not. You see, we are bound by who God has revealed himself to be. And we don't get to change him just because it's uncomfortable. And he's saying you delivered him to death and denied his deserved pardon. Right? Was Jesus guilty of any actual crimes? No. Pilate even saw this and said, this is an innocent man. I'm going to let him go. And they denied this. See, Peter's not going to write a book on how to make people feel good enough to join a church, is he? He would not write a really good church growth book. I heard somebody say at a conference one time, I think I've said this before, that it was Francis Chan. I love him. He's a great author. And I was at a conference one time and he was speaking. He said, I've been convicted lately because I think if Jesus started a church today, mine would be bigger. Think about that statement. Because Jesus was not about drawing the crowds with baiting them with everything that he could, was he? He spoke the truth. Peter here telling them, hey, listen, again, if his desire was just to gain a bunch of numbers, he was doing it the wrong way, wasn't he? The first thing he does is tell them, first of all, you're silly and you have a low view of God because you're thinking man can do something that man can't do. You need to be looking at God. And the second thing he tells them is, you are sinners and you killed Jesus. This is not the methods that are taught in tons of books across the world because it shouldn't work. And yet in Acts 4:4 we see that 2,000 men are added to the church after this sermon. 2,000 salvations of men. This doesn't include women and children. With him telling them, first of all, you have a low view of God. Second of all, you killed Jesus and are sinners in need of a Savior. You see, that's the thing. There's, again, I think in evangelism and in church growth and in all kinds of things, we tend to make very much of man and very little of God. I think we spend far too much time focusing on new programs and methods instead of time spent saying, God, what do I need to do? What does your word expect of me and how can I be obedient? But even before that, I think we spend far, and I'm saying we because I see this in my own life, far too little time in prayer. We have a low view of God when our prayer lives are as little as they are. Does that make sense? Your view of God can be determined by how much time you spend in prayer. If you spend very little time in prayer, it's because you think God is going to do very little in your life. If you spend a lot of time in prayer, it's because you understand that God can do anything. Sadly, that's condemning for me because my prayer life is not anywhere near what it should be. So Peter trusts in God to grow his church, not in his own methods. He says, you denied the holy and righteous one and you asked for a murderer to be granted to you. This is the ultimate portrayal of choosing the death and right of sin in the world over the holy righteousness that comes from God. These people were given a chance. They said, remember Pilate said, look, this Jesus is innocent. And so I'm going to let you choose somebody to set free. Either Jesus, the innocent person who's done nothing wrong, or Barabbas, who we see as a murderer. And they chose Barabbas. You see, the thing is that we have to continue choosing Christ every day. Now, I'm not saying that means you have to choose to be saved every single day. That work is held onto by God. You are held in God's power, not in your own. And I believe fully and completely that your salvation, once it begins, you're in. God's the one that has hold of you. But salvation does not end Satan's plan to destroy you. He will tempt you with all that the world has to offer, and you must daily choose Christ. Daily choose to say Christ and the things that He offers are better than what Satan and the world could offer me. He says, you killed the author of life and God raised from the dead. They chose to forgive one who took lives and to kill one who gave life to all. Is that not wild? They set free a man who was a murderer, who had taken the lives of others, and then they killed the one who had given life to every human who had ever lived. It's the worst irony that we see in all of Scripture, showing the true power of sin in the world. But though this was a damning sin, it was God's plan to allow His Son to become the ultimate sacrifice. And death could not keep our Savior. He conquered sin and death in His resurrection. He says at the end of that section of verse 15 that to this we are witnesses. I want us to understand something. It's not just Peter and John that are witnesses of this. We are witnesses of this as well. Now, we weren't physically there at the birth, the ministry, and the resurrection, death and resurrection of Jesus, right? None of us are over 2,000 years old, I don't think. But since we weren't there physically, that does not mean that we're not witnesses of the power of Christ. If Jesus has saved you from your sins, you are a witness of His saving power. And we're called to be witnesses to the world of this. We're going to close with verse 16. And His name, by faith in His name, has made this man strong, whom you see and know. And the faith that is through Jesus has given the man this perfect health in the presence of you all. This was not a magical incantation. This wasn't Peter and John memorizing the magical things that Jesus taught them and saying, abracadabra, and the man is healed. Had nothing to do with that. It was faith. We see here that this man believed on Christ for salvation, and he also received a miraculous healing. So they witnessed the impossible physical healing, but it was nothing compared to his spiritual healing. He was dead in his sins and made alive. So they saw a smaller physical healing. They saw that, right? They witnessed this. They looked at this and they said, oh, this guy has been crippled his whole life. I see this. And suddenly now he's walking, and Peter and John are here. They must have been the ones that did it. They had the wrong perspective, and they missed the biggest part, because the biggest thing is not that he was a crippled man that was made able to walk again. It's that he was a dead man that was made alive. He was lost in his sins, and suddenly he was forgiven. He was just before God because of Christ's righteousness. They couldn't see the best healing that took place there. He says, and the faith that is through Jesus has given the man this perfect health in the presence of you all. And again, he's saying for the last time, stop looking at us and look at God. He is the one who inspired our worship. He is the one who does the impossible. He is the one who heals and works miracles. We are simply obedient. We have to bow your heads and close your eyes with me this morning. We're going to go into a time of invitation. I just have a few questions for you right now. My first one is just on the point of this passage. I've talked to you guys about perspective. What are you beholding? What are you looking at? Has a high view of man diminished your view of God? Have you thought so much of mankind and our abilities, maybe even your own abilities, and has that view of thinking how capable you are diminished your view of God? Are you blind to God's activity in your life because you've given all the credit to others? Lastly, does your worship reflect the awesomeness of God? Maybe there's some in here who are like these people of Israel who have been exposed to the truth. You saw and you've heard about Jesus, but you rejected him because he's not who you thought he was, not who you wanted him to be. He didn't come just to make you rich. and make everything happy. He came to save you from your sins, and you didn't see that you were a sinner. Maybe that this is the first time this morning that you're recognizing that you are a sinner, and you need the forgiveness of a Savior. If that's you this morning, I want to beg you, during our invitation time, in this next song, just walk forward. Come up here and talk to me. I'd love to tell you more about what the salvation is. I'd love for you to surrender your life to Christ this morning. Maybe some of you, like the people here, are realizing that you need to join this church, and as they did, as they joined the church, and the first church in Jerusalem. If that's what you need to do this morning, I want to ask you to come down and start that process this morning. I would say probably more than not that most of us in here just need to spend time praying. Maybe just spending time, first of all, confessing and saying, God, I'm so sorry that I've had such a small view of you. Maybe you realize through your prayer life that you have expected very little out of God because you think that you and other people are able to accomplish everything that needs to be done. Maybe you need to spend time in confession of that and in repentance and saying, God, help me to see you as big as you are. Help me to worship you for your activity and stop worshiping man. Maybe some of you just need prayer for other things. And again, as we see here, God is the healer. God is the one who can do miraculous things. Maybe if you need a miracle this morning, all you need to do is just come and pray. Maybe you're praying at your seat. Maybe you sit down. Maybe you kneel. Maybe you come to the altar because it's a place where you can symbolize laying something down before God. Whatever you need to do, I just ask for your obedience this morning and expect God to do something awesome because He is awesome. Lord, we just give this time to you. Lord, I am so sorry for my low view of you that I've had so much in my life. Where I depend on my abilities and on the abilities of others to see things happen, and I forget that you are the one who works in all things. Lord, I'm sorry for where I've ever taken credit for your activity in others' lives. Help me to constantly point people to you. That you are the one that does the work, that does the growing, that does the healing, that does the teaching. You are the one who works inside of your people. All I'm called to be is obedient. Help us in this church to have a high view of you and let that affect everything we do. Let us worship you because we see how great you are. Let us witness about you because we've seen your activity in our lives of saving us from our lost state. Let us give because you've given so much. In your name I pray. Amen. You guys stand and respond however God leads you.
Give 180.